last Thursday, the 8-man Economic Advisory Council, inaugurated last year by President Muhammadu Buhari, submitted its preliminary report on the progress of the economy to him. The report made a key observation that population growth is outstripping the economic growth rate. And that council made a number of recommendations that, in its opinion, could halt the slide and launch the economy back on the path of meaningful recovery. For a discussion around this, we're now being joined here by Muda Yusuf, Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Well, Muda Yusuf, good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good to have you here again on the morning show.
Great to see you.
Yeah, but I mean, what do you make of this submission by the National Economic Advisory Council? The president obviously was impressed. He now says he won't meet with them quarterly. They will now meet every 6 weeks. What does that mean? And then again, the recommendations that they have made about an enabling environment, about economic growth rate, you know, about cooperation and collaboration among the MDAs. What's your take?
Well, I think it's a very good development. Of course, some of us have been expressing concern that since the inauguration of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council, nothing much had happened. So it's good now that you have this report submitted to the president. We are hoping that we have the right kind of framework for the implementation of those recommendations. Because it is one thing to make recommendations, it's another thing for the recommendations to be implemented. As we speak, I'm not sure there is any clear framework, at least to us, those who are, outside us.
Stakeholders.
Yes, as to how you can move this from the point of recommendation to the point of implementation. The Economic Advisory Council don't have executive powers. They can only advise. Unlike what we had when we had the economic management team. In fact, if you ask me, I would have even suggested that the Economic Advisory Council should normally have complemented the economic management team. Because the economic management team was chaired by the vice president. The vice president has some executive powers. He can summon ministers, he can follow up on implementation and all of that. So, but because this council was brought in, the economic management team was dissolved. So we don't have that kind of framework.
But, I mean, is it really a problem? The president is the chief economic, man for the government. So if the president gives directives through the Economic Advisory Council in terms of recommendations, that shouldn't be a problem. Should that be a problem?
Well, I just feel that if you have that kind of framework that is properly institutionalized and structured, don't forget the vice president is also the chairman of the National Economic Council. Apart from dealing with issues at the federal level, there are also issues at the state level, that the VP chairs. So I believe that we need that kind of complementary structure. Secondly, it is important that the Economic Advisory Team also interface with stakeholders in the economy. Because you cannot know this economy better than those who are investors. Macroeconomic issues are very important. They are very fundamental, to make the economy function well. But investment climate issues can even be more important. Because it is these investors that will create the jobs. It is these investors that will generate revenue for government. And unless we are able to identify the pain points of these investors, we may not be able to achieve much. So beyond just meeting with the president and submitting reports, it is important that we also bring in some empirical input into whatever recommendations are being made. And you can only get that when you interface also periodically with stakeholders in the economy to identify some cross-cutting issues and how we need to deal with them, and to also identify what you can call sector-specific issues. Because there are issues across sectors. And it takes those who are investors in that sector to be able to tell you properly how to go about it, what you need to do, and all of that. So this kind of engagement, is very necessary in order to have a more robust and enriched recommendation to government.
When you talked about investors and stakeholders and, consulting them, my mind went to the Okada ban in Lagos State. But the Economic Advisory Council has come up with recommendations. But like you said, not that specific. They're quite general and obvious recommendations. But I want to ask you your thoughts. Are you concerned at all about the fact that the Council has observed a lack of coordination between ministries and departments? We're now well into the second term of this administration.
Well, that is not new. We have always said that for a long time. Quite a lot of times, many of the agencies of government, those who are in charge of policies and things, they work in silos. There is no proper coordination among them. And even at the highest level of policy making, even with the central bank, the finance ministry, trade and investment, NIPC, it was obvious that there was no coordination. And even I think a couple of times, people have talked about coordination between the fiscal policy and the monetary policy. This has been a recurring concern. So it's not anything new. So what is important now is to see what kind of framework we put in place to ensure that there is this coordination. And who will ensure the coordination, who will streamline it. That is where the issue is. Because from the report I read, the president gave directives to the Secretary to Government to ensure that there is coordination. Fine. But how is it going to be delivered? Because it is good to make some of these statements. It's also very important to have the strategy to deliver them, to get the right kind of outcomes. So that is what we expect to see. What are the areas in which we have issues in terms of coordinations? We are the divergent points in terms of policy, connection, and all of that. Because I have seen very senior people in government who are supposed to be driving issues of investment. And yet you have policies come out either from finance or from CBN that will have far-reaching implications for investment. And yet those who are in the investment ministry are not even in the know at all.
Oh dear.
So these are very fundamental issues which I think the economic advisory team should also dig deeply into in order to be able to advise the president very well. And we also have institutions of government that also need very close monitoring or close check in terms of their impact. We have a lot of regulatory issues which investors are contending with. So unless we have a platform to bring this on the table, when we had the economic management team, we used to have quarterly meeting with the private sector. Since that was scrapped, there is no platform for that kind of engagement anymore. So an engagement is key. I keep emphasizing. You cannot understand the investment environment better than the investors. And we should stop talking too much about foreign investors. It is the domestic investors that are doing a lot of the job. They are creating the jobs. Charity must begin at home. Whatever they are saying, whatever they are complaining, let us address it first before we begin to talk about foreign investors.
And I think the latest example, as Tundu mentioned and you mentioned as well, of scaring investors away really is the Okada and Keke ban, Okada ban really that we've seen in Lagos State. And it's interesting because on Friday I expressed that we're in a really dire economic position right now because regardless, our growth rate is below our population growth rates, our economic growth rate. So at the end of the day, we have negative growth. And one has to look at steps that we need to take to put us in a position of real economic growth. And that's what I'd like to ask you about. What kind of steps does government need to take for us to see real economic growth? Because, the ERGP had a deadline of 2020. Here we are, and we're very far away from the 7% that was projected.
Well, to get growth, you need investment. And to get investment, you create the environment for investors to be able to invest. Just gave the example of the Okada restriction or ban, whatever it is.
So what are the steps?
Some guys have brought in investment. Growth? Of course, you engage with investors, and you also be in a position to know what policies will hurt investment and what policies will not. And the best way to do this is to ensure that you engage properly with the investors. The Okada team will have expected that there should have been some engagement. You have an objective that you want to achieve. Between the government and the stakeholders, you can work together to see how you can achieve the objective. Investment and security are not mutually exclusive.
Well, if I may play the devil's advocate, you recall that, one of the major priorities of this administration is addressing the ease of doing business and creating an enabling environment for both local investment and foreign direct investment. Hence, the president set up a major body, the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, PEBEC, right? And even this recent new visa policy 2020, the whole idea is to attract investment, make engagement even easier. That's by the way. But the question I want to ask you is a question we had discussed with you on this program before, the closure of the border. We had expected that by the end of January, the border with the Republic of Benin will be reopened. That has not happened. What is the response from the business community? Quickly, because we have just 1 more minute to go.
Well, we are not happy at the continued closure, but we must also recognize the fact that the government has also given some conditions, especially for Benin Republic, on the conditions that needs to be met before the borders can be opened. You must also admit that the Benin Republic regime has also been engaging in some predatory trade practices that has been undermining our own economy. Of course, we have our own internal issues in terms of capacity to manage the border and all of that. But it takes, both this resolving the external issues and dealing with domestic issues before we can actually come up with what an enduring solution should be for the opening of the border. I'm talking about ease of doing business and PEBEC. PEBEC also has limited executive powers. I mean, go and just try to clear cargo at the ports. And you know what it is to be an investor in this economy. I'm talking of entrepreneurs who go through the entire rigor of importing raw materials, going to the port, transporting things, going to sourcing for finance and all of that. It's a whole lot of headache. And some of these things are even beyond the capacity of PEBEC to enforce.
Months-long processes.
Well, thank you very much, Muda Yusuf. Always a delight to have you on the morning show.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. We look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.